Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. I trust the weekend went well. We had a busy one, and I'll get to that in a moment. I'd like to first thank Bonnie. We have this regular Monday meetup on CNBC Africa, and it's always an engaging conversation. And we spoke about the Euro, Africa, the NSE, oil, contagion, spillover risks, and all sorts. So thanks. I took this photograph early in the morning from my office on the 8th floor, looking back towards the city of Nairobi, and let me post it as well. I'd like to thank His Excellency Jacques Peterlou for a marvellous mindspeak. We are now in the Edith Suite. Edith Kimani tweeted, morning well spent listening and questioning. Thank you, Ali Khan and Jacques Peterlou, and it was great to catch up with her. We generated 568 posts with 304 users. The reach was 7.366 million impressions. And the post that got everyone's attention with 94 retweets was when Jacques said, a member of parliament in Switzerland gets less than an MCA in Migori. And sort of makes one a little bit worried when one thinks of all the recent events in Greece and so forth. And I'll also put up a link where you can have a look at the conversation on Twitter. It's always very intense. Macro thoughts. My weekend piece was Greece referendum, a defining moment in the EU. So the world is on tenterhooks as it awaits the result of the Greek referendum. The language has become seriously adversarial. What they're doing with Greece has a name, terrorism. What Brussels and the Troika want is for the yes vote to win so they could humiliate the Greeks, said the Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. Greece represents just 2% of the European economy. Wolfgang Schäuble, who is depicted as a vampire sucking Greek blood, is reported to have said, and this is via Tim Geithner's memoirs, letting Greece burn would make it easier to build a stronger Europe. Paul Mason tweeted on July the 3rd, what's happening in Greece? Regime change using banks and TV stations as cluster bombs. EU overthrowing Syriza. I said either way, yes or no, and it's a no. The European project is unraveling in my view. I think it's highly unlikely that European firewalls around Greece can prevent a Greek wildfire leaping those firewalls. A big breakdown will be a catalyst for a further flight to quality US treasuries, German Bund, Swiss franc, Japanese yen, and a further sell-off in peripheral and riskier assets, and potentially some serious contagion. I said foreign investors have been downshifting sub-Saharan African exposure, and this is as plain as day and can be seen in the performance of our currencies, which are performing abjectly. Over in China, the bull market is now being mauled by the bears. Consider that there are more individual investors in the Chinese stock market than there are Communist Party members, and you will appreciate this stock market crash represents probably the biggest political risk to the neo-totalitarian, I love that description, I found it in Quartz, Xi Jinping. And I said, what's clear now, particularly in Africa, is we live in a much more interconnected world where events as far away as Athens and Shanghai can impact asset prices here. So let me leave you with one further comment. The Swiss ambassador Jacques Peterlou is exiting and is to be the Director General of the Directorate for Resources within the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs in Bern, responsible for securing and managing resources within the FDFA, in charge of a budget of 3.2 billion Swiss francs. And Jacques said this, Kenya should have a GDP of 15%. It should be taking off like a rocket. We have now decelerated 5 quarters on quarters. We're no longer going forwards. We're now in reverse gear. The budget had an embedded 7% GDP expansion. We were below 5% and missing our projections by a mile. Schulden Zuna, Greece final result, the noes have it 61.3%, really resounding. Bloomberg is saying the referendum party could turn into a Euro hangover. and I think it could. Euro, of course, dipped below 110, back above it again. And like Atlas, who single-handedly held up the world, so does Thomas J. Jordan of the Swiss National Bank. And I also said the previous week that if Greece exits the euro, and that looks inevitable now, it might well prove a Trojan horse with respect to Russia. China might lean in as well. I was talking about the geopolitical angles. Tsipras visiting Putin at least twice over the last 4 weeks. And I said, I think that is one consideration that the European hierarchy did not consider. I think the US hierarchy did. And that's why they were sort of more pro finding some kind of accommodation with Greece. 29th of June, my piece was Greece to unravel faster after referendum call. Go and have a look at that again. And then on the 12th of January, I wrote about how I thought it was the year of G2. It might just be the year of G1 at the rate we're going, as Europe off balance. And I was writing about how I saw the euro and so forth. China has rolled out emergency measures to prevent a stock market crash. I'm not sure where it closed. I didn't have a chance to double check. Home thoughts. Language is a skin. I rub my language against the other. It is as if I had words instead of fingers, or fingers at the tip of my words. My language trembles with desire. Roland, Barthes. This I found very powerful, actually. In front of the photograph of my mother as a child, I tell myself she is going to die. I shudder like Winnicott's psychotic patient over a catastrophe which has already occurred. Whether or not the subject is already dead, every photograph is this catastrophe. And I like this photograph from The Guardian of people cooling down in a fountain beside the Manzanares River in Madrid, Spain. IAEA tweeted IAEA Director General Amano's remarks to Western media in Vienna on Iran talks. Put up that photograph. My conclusions are Iran looks so close that you can reach out and touch it. Of course, it might be unraveled at any moment, of course, but it seems to me that it's very, very close. I wrote about it on the 28th of October 2013, when it looked close as well. The recent rapprochement between President Obama, Iran's Rouhani has certainly snapped a losing sequence. US-Iran relations that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. There's a great documentary, which I've seen before, and I watched it again last night, which has Jimmy Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Shah. Oh my goodness, it was really good. The Ayatollah, his return. The Shah was the second and last monarch of the House of Pahlavi, otherwise known as the Peacock Throne. Barack Hussein Obama, Hassan Rouhani share the same name as did Prophet Muhammad's revered grandsons, those who pursue the study of personal names and anthroponymy, especially in the Islamic world, probably view this as very fortuitous. Then I referred to A Weiwei, what's in a name? Let me read it again because I love it so much. A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. A name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights. And no matter how poor or how rich, all living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes, the expectant blessings of kindness and virtue. Hussein and Hassan are going to have to cut through a great deal of interference. Let's see if they can manage it. Put up a photograph of President Rouhani that I like. Another one of Ayatollah Khomeini returning to Iran on that day when he set foot after so many years and the revolution just went over the edge, as it were. Jay Zarif tweeted a while back, heading home after a busy week, much remains, but always a pleasure and honor to work for the beautiful land of the brave. Put up this photograph, which must be the mountain range in Iran. Beautiful article by William Dalrymple in the New Yorker, The Great Divide, the Violent Legacy of Indian Partition. By 1948, as the Great Migration drew to a close, more than 15 million people had been uprooted, and between 1 and 2 million people were dead. The comparison with the death camps is not so far-fetched as it may seem. Partition is central to modern identity in the Indian subcontinent, as the Holocaust is to the identity among Jews. The acclaimed Pakistani historian Aisha Jalal has called partition the central historical event in 20th century South Asia. She writes, "A defining moment that is neither beginning nor end. Partition continues to influence how the peoples and states of post-colonial South Asia envisage their past, present and future." The question of how India's deeply intermixed and profoundly syncretic culture unravels so quickly has spawned a vast literature. Polarization of Hindus and Muslims occurred during just a couple of decades of the 20th century. Important point, that really. But by the middle of the century it was so complete that many on both sides believed it was impossible for adherents of the two religions to live together peacefully. Let's talk about the cultural mixing took place throughout the subcontinent in medieval Hindu texts from South India. The Sultan of Delhi is sometimes talked about as the incarnation of the god Vishnu. In the 17th century, the Mughal crown prince Dara Shikoh had the Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the central text of Hinduism, translated into Persian and composed a study of Hinduism and Islam. The mingling of two oceans, which stressed the affinities of the two faiths. Not all Mughal emperors were so open-minded, talks about Aurangzeb. But the last Mughal emperor, enthroned in 1837, wrote that Hinduism and Islam shared the same essence, and his court lived out this ideal at every level. Brilliant essay, well worth reading. Beautiful, lyrical, ultimately sad that so many pawns had to die. When I wrote that, I went back to King Lear. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. In the last night's storm I such a fellow saw, which made me think a man a worm. My son came then into my mind, and yet my mind was then scarce friends with him. I have heard more since. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Rwanda government tweeted, on the 4th of July 1994, the RPA liberated the city of Kigali and Butare, leading to the end of the genocide. And that photograph captured that very moment, I suppose. Harrowing footage, child executioners were forced to brutally slaughter a group of more than 25. This is Palmyra, ISIS. And this other photograph, a waiting crowd. It's become sort of Hitlerian, hasn't it? What was it? I can't remember where Hitler used to have those massive outdoor events. Nuremberg. Waiting crowd, and the men kneeled along the stage with a giant ISIS flag. Look at the faces of the children in those two photographs. The barbarians are at the gate, I'm afraid. Dara 2011, Syria's Islamist Insurrection in Disguise by Professor Tim Anderson, and I agree with him, I'm afraid. I've seen from the beginning armed protesters in those demonstrations. They were the first to fire on the police. Very often the violence of the security forces comes in response to the brutal violence of the armed insurgents. Jesuit priest Father Franz van der Lugt, January 2012, Homs, Syria. And essentially making the claim that it was an insertion there, which it was, clearly was. On one occasion last year, North Korean state media reported that Kim Jong-un criticized the construction of the new airport, highlighting defects. I'll put up a photograph, it looks pretty smart. 11 weeks after nearly dying in an assassination attempt of 1981, he climbed onto the springboard of the Camp David swimming pool and threw a perfect half-pike at Ronald Reagan. Currency markets this morning, the euro was below 110, I think we're up around 110.60, I haven't checked recently. Dollar index around the 96.30 level. Japanese yen, when I checked last, 122.31, Swissy 0.9444, pound 155.55, Aussie 0.7472, that's crumbling. India rupee 63.585, South Korean won 11.2531. Rial 313.46, Egyptian pound, that slipped quick. Now it's 777. Dollar index, I'll put up a 6-month chart. I think you buy this on dips, it will top 100 and then 110. Euro, dollar, you got to sell rallies, but it's tricky because you get the Swiss coming in, Jordan in particular, buying up all the euros he can, and then got to work your way around that kind of operation. Should and sooner oil prices drop on risk-averse trade after Greek no referendum. Brent below 60 for the first time since April. 12th of January, and we got a spike after that, but I think my sentiments are now being proven right. I do not see a near-term bounce in the oil price. I think it could average $50 a barrel for the next 24 months. Let's see, that's WTI. There is no Hail Mary pass coming. And I also on the 23rd of March, I said I eventually expect a sharp slide below 40 because there is no more storage. And I said if Iran is rehabilitated, all the signals now point in that direction. An additional 1 million barrels will be pumped into the international markets. The only way to bring this market into equilibrium is for massive cuts in supply, and this will not happen. In fact, instead of pumping less, many countries are adding more in a vain attempt to make up the revenue shortfall. I've written before about the bear raid on oil. It was a very sophisticated strategy hatched by the erstwhile community organizer from Chicago who morphed into the president, but also a sophisticated 21st century oil warfare specialist. A break below 40, and whenever oil falls, it is like a falling knife. It's very difficult to catch it. There are some doomsday predictions out there that a barrel could even cost $20. Now, I learned from this morning, the Wall Street Journal, Iran wants to double oil exports after sanctions end. Crude oil got below 55. I think it's back above 55. I'll put up a 6-month chart. Gold, 1168. I think that's going down as well. Let's move on to Africa. Steve Song tweeted, African undersea cable update, new link Brazil, Canary Islands, Cape Verde. Have a look at the map he puts up. And really the arrival, and this was of the internet and the information century, has changed everything on this continent. Everything, totally and completely. In particular, the relationship between the rulers and the ruled. That's a very big change. The Economist, to make it a bit more banal, jobs, games or porn, an analysis of what Africa Googles. South African oil shares up 4.41% but fell 0.48% on Friday. Interesting article in The Guardian calling Johannesburg a radioactive city. How Johannesburg's townships are paying for its mining past. Johannesburg is undoubtedly the most uranium-contaminated city in the world, says Dr. Anthony Turton. Put up an aerial view of mine dumps near Johannesburg. This photograph was taken by Corbis. And a photograph of the sunset in Johannesburg, November 1st last year. Dollar Rand, 1237 area, last time I had a look. CNN breaking news says there's a new law in Egypt which will make publishing news that contradicts official versions of terrorist events a crime. Good grief. The stock market is falling, the currency is falling. EGX 30 is down 7.931%. This is the lowest level since December. This week on the frontiers, this is a very interesting piece that the Wall Street Journal puts out. Nigeria's waiting game. Investors are starting to lose patience with Nigeria's new President Muhammadu Buhari as he continues to delay selecting a new cabinet. Late this week, Buhari compounded their concerns when it was revealed he was not planning to announce a new cabinet until September. In the wake of the announcement, the country's stock market plunged 3% to a new post-election low. One frontier-focused hedge fund manager told Wall Street Journal his discussions on the topic with investors have been disturbing. And they are. It is disturbing. It makes no sense to delay. This is an unconscionable delay when your currency is on the ropes. And really you need to lead from the front, not sort of sit back and say, I'll come and lead maybe in 90 days. Buhari's latest Boko Haram headache, waves of female suicide bombers. Officials are also saying they're open to talks. The Nigerian oil share is down 6.114% year to date. Ghana says it sold enough cocoa to service its 2014 loan. Purchased 652,986 tons of cocoa in the 2014-2015 season. Significantly down on last year. I'm not sure how much it's down, but it's down a lot. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index down a marginal 0.04%. Do you remember that enormous trade in Equity Bank that I was talking about I knew Helios was the seller, I wasn't sure who was the buyer. It turns out Genesis Investment Management has enhanced its shareholding in equity by acquiring an additional 4.4% stake in Equity Group. Shares were previously held by Helios. Equity is trading around the 46 level. It's down 8% year to date. There's a link on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to interrogate the share price. Kenya shilling, when I walked in this morning, it was printing 100.46. But according to Bonnie, it didn't go above 100, but it's obviously going to 107, I'm afraid. Shilling feels the pressure as trade deficit rises 59%. The gap between Kenya's imports and exports widened a massive 59% the first quarter of the year. Kenya National Bureau of Statistics reported the gap, also known as the current account deficit, stood at 101.5 billion, up from 63.7 billion. Ooh, that's when oil prices have been low. The central bank shows that shilling has depreciated by 8.9% since the beginning of the year. Deterioration in the current account balance was mainly occasioned by the increase in the import bill and the decline in the value of total exports. As a consequence, the current account balance recorded a deficit of 101.5 billion. Somewhere else, I read that a lot of it was due to the standard gauge railway. I apologise for coffee. Nairobi oil share down 0.8533% this year. Nairobi NSE 20 both fell about 0.5% on Friday, down 5.86% year to date. If you want to look into any share price, go to Rich Data. If you want to log yourself in and leave the market trading in the background, just register on rich.co.ke. Two things: get a password, then use that login and password to get into Rich Live, and you can watch the markets. And also it keeps you on our database, and we can send you any events that we might be hosting as well. Once again, thank you so much.